the life of a professional sportsman is not that easy. The easy part is playing the game, but the stuff that happens to you around that, being in a team sport, at least you've got some teammates around, but you're on your own a lot and you're away from your support system quite a bit. Not everyone can deal with it. And, so...
From smashing centuries to pulling off a move that still has everyone talking, Greg Chappell was a big deal in cricket. How did this Aussie bloke go from being a batting hero to a villain in the blink of an eye? How's he living it up these days? Let's dig up Greg Chappell's tenure in cricket and his post-retirement escapades. Greg Chappell was born on August 7, 1948, in Unley, South Australia. His old man, Martin, was a big deal in Adelaide cricket, and his granddad, Vic Richardson, was none other than the Australian Test captain. Talk about cricketing royalty. He started swinging at a proper ball at the tender age of 8, representing St Leonard's primary school. The little gremlin was already on the cricket pitch, and apparently he was also a bit of a baseball whiz. Young Greg wasn't the biggest kid around, so he had to get creative. He figured out how to deal with the bouncy ball by playing most of his shots to the leg side. Smart thinking, eh? The little cricket whiz was more interested in what was happening on the cricket pitch than in the classroom. Fair play to him, we suppose. But then, boom, in 1964 to 65, he had a growth spurt that would make a beanstalk jealous. Suddenly, he's towering over everyone. With this extra height, he started dominating schoolboy cricket and scoring double centuries. That's not normal, and teaming up with Ashley Woodcock to put on a massive partnership. The Chappells bat together for the first time. Must have been a sight to behold. Those two teaming up for Glenelg in a semi-final against Port Adelaide in 1966? Cricket gold, we reckon. But the dynamic duo hasn't fared in the world of cricket without their fair share of controversies. Before we get into some tea talk, take a moment to like and subscribe. Now, back to the video. The underarm bowling incident. You can't talk about Australian cricket without that one coming up, can you? That's the black mark on the game, eh? Australia won on January 24th, 1981, and the New Zealand representative won on January 28th. The two remaining games in the series won all. The scene was perfect for a cracker of a final on February 1st, 1981. Before the underarm drama, there was another controversial moment. Just moments before, Greg Chappell nearly got caught out, but the umpires said it wasn't out. Even the great commentator Richie Benaud was convinced that was a catch. Replays showed he probably was. That was a bit of a dodgy decision, and it set the scene. Greg's almost caught out, but the umps said he's not out. Fair cop, some might say, but some reckon he should have just taken Snedden at his word and walked. Not questioning it, Greg says he isn't sure, so he plays on. So the Aussies are in a proper pickle. They've got Lilly, the star bowler, but their bowlers are all messed up on the overs. It's a proper shambles, really. They've got 2 bowlers with 1 over left each. New Zealand needed 6 runs in the last over. Bruce Edger, the best batsman they got, in on strike. The crowd must have been on their edge. Every person's mind is expecting 6 runs right now. It's a tie game so far, but the game was not over yet. The New Zealanders needed to square the match with 6 runs and had 1 ball in hand. The Aussies had very few options. To prevent New Zealand from holing out for a 6 and thereby a win, Captain Greg Chappell made an unpopular decision. He asked Trevor to deliver the ball underarm. Bowling underarm was perfectly legal at the time, but as far as Scott was concerned, it was against the spirit of the game. This was really something out of the schoolyard. It was not international cricket. The whole thing became a huge talking point and is debated to this very day. McKechnie was furious, the New Zealand batsman. He could not believe what he had just seen. The bloke threw his bat in a fit of fury. The Aussies had scraped home by just 6 runs, but it was an illusory victory. The New Zealanders tramped off the field disgusted. The captain, Jeff Howarth, was beside him. He argued long and hard with the officials, pointing out that this kind of bowling was against the game's regulations. The Aussies won, but lost respect from the cricketing world. Ian Chappell, the brother of Greg, thought it was a lousy idea too. Richie Benaud, captain of Australia, thought that it was an absolute disgrace for cricket. The New Zealand team was gutted. They just couldn't believe it. Even the prime ministers of each country got involved. The PM of Aussie stated that it was against the spirit of the game and cowardly, while the PM of Kiwi agreed. The whole thing was a massive scandal. It was many years after the underarm incident that we started to understand a little of what was going on inside the head of Greg Chappell on that particular day. Basically, he was trying to say he wasn't in the right headspace.
I walked over to Don Weezer, I think was the umpire at the bowler's end, and I said, Don, you better instruct the batsman that Trevor's going to bowl the last ball underarm. His eyes did roll back in his head.
The Aussies went back the next year with the same team. The Rowdies gave a proper roasting to Greg Chappell. They went as far as throwing a bowl of grass onto the pitch, just laying into him. But he still made a century. Both Greg and Trevor Chappell have since spoken of how mortified they were over the whole affair. Surprisingly, McKechnie doesn't hold a grudge. Still, Greg cemented a decent legacy to his name, even though he isn't in the best financial condition these days. Let's have a look at his earlier days. Well, young Greg went to England to hone his skills. 2 years of county cricket, but his batting average not exactly setting the world on fire. Remember him lining up and leg spin bowling? Up in Yorkshire, he raced in and bowled medium pace, and boy, did it pay off. 71 wickets in a season, including a spell of 7 for 40. Not too shabby for a bloke who was mainly a batter. He was even made the captain of Somerset after making a scorching century. But a bouncer that came from the best in the business, John Snow, hit him in the eye and almost ended his career. Yet, he still reached all those runs and everything in Shield games at home in Australia. Everyone was tipping him to play for the national team. But then, bang, he gets dropped. He's smashing hundreds right and left in the 1969-70 season, and everyone is talking about him. The Aussie team is getting beat on in South Africa, so the pressure's on to perform. And then, the big moment comes. His Test debut was in Perth in December of 1970. At number 7, the lad smashes 100 and puts on a huge stand with Ian Redpath. If that is not a dream start, then what is? Q-talk in the whole town after Greg finally steered this Queensland team to their first victory in the Sheffield Shield. How well did he do? 1,000 plus runs in the 1973-74 season. Hard cheese, really. They failed in the last test as a kid named Jeff Thompson whipped their butts for real. Now, that is where Greg's genius lay. Spotting the raw talent in Thompson, he convinced him to join the Queensland team for the season 1974-75. He was quite a genius at putting together a good team, something that proved useful when he started coaching teams post-retirement. Things started to go downhill for Greg. He was under the hammer of this awful tonsillitis, really buggering up his play in the 1974-75 Ashes series. He still ground for an Aussie batting lineup, coming in with 608 runs at 55.3, but he couldn't seem to get set. His tonsils were removed in the hope of correcting it, but he also shed much of his weight, which also did not help bring his batting in order. He played in the inaugural World Cup in 1975, but then had a bad time during the 1975 Ashes. The going was tough, especially for the champ. Greg came back strongly after the illness. He had reached the pinnacle that year, for sure. It was the year when he scored the record-breaking figure of 1,547 runs. He was then given the captaincy, where he started with a bang, centuries in both innings of his very first test as captain. Australia, in their usual way, overran the gap-toothed West Indies 5-1. And at the very heart of it all was Greg, his brilliant 182, not out just one highlight. A bunch of players had retired from the team, and it was struggling. That meant Greg had to take a leadership role in bringing new players and coping with injuries to important players such as Jeff Thompson. Not easy, but he faced the challenge head-on. The Aussie team was under fire for playing defensive cricket during the series against Pakistan. But Greg was still the shining light, scoring a century in their only win. The New Zealand tour was more of the same, with Australia in rebuilding mode. Then there was the infamous streaker. Greg wasn't impressed with that because he caught the guy and thumped him with his bat. The crowd let out a massive noise, and wouldn't you know it, the umpire felt obliged to send Greg out for the interference. Typical. Though the biggest piece of off-field news was yet to be known. Everything was up with Greg to play in another cricket tournament, the World Series Cricket. Greg signed this enormous deal with World Series Cricket during the Centenary Test in June 1977. Big money, big pressure. He led Australia to a dramatic win, but some reckon he wasn't at his best under the pressure. Now that Ian Chappell was leading the WSC Australian team, Greg could again concentrate on his batting. And how he focused. Back to his best, he crafted an unbeaten 661 runs at 60. But it sure wasn't easy. The pace bowling attacks were brutal, and even the toughest batsmen were getting rattled. Helmets were the latest fad, but not for Greg, who stuck with just temple guards in a demonstration of incredible courage. Only then was it his time to motor along. With Ian injured, Greg took over the captaincy and inspired the team to a badly needed win. He cracked a huge 246 not out, thereby registering the MD of WSC score. All that relentless, fast bowling began to exact a heavy toll, however. He was under the weather the next season, and then came the big one, Bell's palsy. Most would have taken some time off, but not Greg. He was going to play. With half his face paralysed, he had to work out a different technique. And adapt he did. He went on a tear to score hundreds against the fearsome West Indian pace attack. Sadly, those WSC runs don't count toward official stats, but the numbers speak for themselves. 500 in 14 matches at an average of 56.6. Then came the season 1981-82. It was a big shock for Greg. He was getting out for ducks left, right and centre. He looked as if his bat had forgotten how to hit the ball. His average was appalling. Greg Chappell didn't exactly take a breather after hanging up his pads. He plunged headlong into becoming an Australian team selector. It was a tough gig at that time. The team was rebuilding and they were losing a bunch of guys into retirement or those South African rebel tours. He did not, however, stay too much longer, hanging up his boots in 1988. To that point, it had been a hard road. In 1986, he was further recognised and inducted into the Sport Australia Hall of Fame. Recognising his potential at leading teams, he then went on to coach South Australia in the late 1990s, though they could not win any accolades. In 2002, he was further accorded the great honour of induction into the Australian Cricket Hall of Fame. Well, that is the highest possible cricketing accolade in Australia. On the other hand, in 2004, he did some liaison work with the Cricket Academy in Pakistan. In 2005, he got a job, a coaching contract in India, and a nice, fat paycheck to go with it. Then he changed a little of the order of the batting and introduced some unpopular coaching methods. The big guns were not amused. Sehwag, Harbhajan and Zahir Khan all had a word or two to say about his tactics. The Indian public wasn't too fond of him either. The World Cup 2007 was the final nail in the coffin when India lost in the opening round. It was a complete disaster. There was a huge falling out with the captain, Sourav Ganguly. It was pretty visible that it was curtains for him.
And all I can say that,
don't be diplomatic.
And all I can say that you can make a mistake once, and as Jeffrey used to say, you can make one mistake, but if you do that again, you're stupid and you're a fool.
Correct.
Though Greg Chappell's reign as an Indian coach marked a period of plenty of ups and downs, it was not all just a fiasco. He did his part in building the base of the Indian team who won the 2007 T20 World Cup and Cricket World Cup in 2011. The rest, as it is said, became core players for India later on. After working with India, Chappell was not entirely out of the game. He coached the Rajasthan Royals and even did some coaching in the US. It would be really difficult to digest the fact that a 75-year-old cricketing legend, Greg Chappell, is going through financial struggles. You would believe all those years of playing and involvement in the game would have set him up for life. So he says that reality stands opposite to such an imagination. It's a humbling reminder that even the biggest stars can struggle with their finances. People play cricket and make millions nowadays. That's how it is. You wouldn't think a bloke who played cricket for Australia would be battling in life, would you? Said Greg Chappell with a little chuckle. But the fact is, a few of us from that era aren't doing that well. Not that we are broke or something, but definitely not having a high life. That's it for this one. If you're a fan of cricket icons, make sure to check out for other videos.